In the luxurious ballroom by the sea, Eduardo and Beatrice's wedding seemed to be the most anticipated event of the year. The guests, members of high society, filled the room with laughter and lively conversation, while the golden lights of the chandeliers reflected in the champagne glasses. It was the perfect setting for a day of celebration, but in the air there was a quiet tension, especially around Laura, Eduardo's mother. Sitting in the corner, with a sharp look in her eyes, Laura held an envelope in her hands, containing evidence that would turn the wedding into a catastrophe. Beatrice walked down the aisle, stunning in her wedding dress, but behind that perfect smile, she hid the weight of her secret. She had fallen in love with Fernando, Eduardo's best friend, and had been having a secret affair with him for months. Beatrice's gaze would meet Fernando's occasionally, a glint of passion disguised but undeniable. The ceremony continued, and Eduardo looked at Beatrice with eyes full of love, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. As the vows were exchanged, Laura could barely contain the desire to expose Beatrice's betrayal. She knew that this wedding should not happen, not with her son being deceived like this. After the ceremony, the guests gathered in the hall for the toast. Fernando, the best man at the wedding, stood up to give his speech, and with a confident smile, he began to speak. "Eduardo, you are the best friend anyone could have. Today, I am incredibly happy to see you marry a woman as wonderful as Beatrice." As he said this, he cast a discreet and intentional look at Beatrice, who tried to look away, but could not help but feel a slight color on her cheeks. At that moment, Laura suddenly stood up. The hall fell silent. She held the microphone tightly, and her previously calm voice now carried a note of contempt. "I can't stay quiet any longer. This marriage is a sham." Everyone's eyes turned to her, confused. "Beatrice is cheating on my son." Beatrice turned pale, and Eduardo froze, not understanding. "That's ridiculous. What are you talking about, Laura?" Beatrice tried to maintain her composure, but her voice was shaking. "Ridiculous? I have proof." Laura lifted the envelope with trembling hands, while Eduardo looked at her in disbelief. Before she could open the envelope, something unexpected happened. The tension Laura had been holding in for so long began to manifest itself physically in ways she could never have anticipated. The already silent room grew even quieter when a muffled noise was heard. A low sound, followed by another and another. Laura had begun to fart. They weren't discreet, they were loud, stinky farts, the kind you couldn't ignore. Laura's face turned red with embarrassment as she tried to maintain her dignity, but the smell began to spread throughout the room. "My God! What is that?" one of the bridesmaids murmured, while covering her nose. Eduardo, not knowing whether he was more shocked by his mother's revelations or by the embarrassing situation, looked around, unable to process it all. "Laura, what are you doing?" Beatrice asked, incredulous, trying to move away discreetly, but the smell seemed to follow Laura's every movement. Fernando, who had always been charismatic and controlled, began to laugh, trying to hide his laughter with a glass of champagne. "Laura, are you okay?" Fernando asked between laughs. But Laura didn't give up. Despite the humiliation, she tore open the envelope and began to take out the photos, exposing the messages exchanged between Beatrice and Fernando. Eduardo took the photos with trembling hands, his eyes wide as he read every word, every image of his wife and his best friend together, in intimate moments. "Beatrice, is it true?" Eduardo asked, his voice wavering, the broken heart reflected in his eyes. "Eduardo, I can explain," Beatrice began, but before she could say more, Laura interrupted. "There's no explanation. She was planning to run away with Fernando after the wedding, taking half of his money." Laura threw the words like blades. "I only did what a mother would do to protect her son." By this time, the smell of farts had permeated the entire room, and the guests began to discreetly move away. But no one left for good, as they were mesmerized by the unfolding drama. "What were you planning?" Eduardo asked, incredulous, looking at Beatrice. Fernando, still trying to maintain control of the situation, approached Eduardo, placing his hand on his shoulder. "Eduardo, it wasn't what it seemed, man. We made a mistake, but we can fix it." "Fix it? You betrayed my trust." Eduardo pushed Fernando, who almost fell. Beatrice, desperate, ran to the garden, surrounded by an artificial lake. There, amidst the flowers and the night breeze, she tried to breathe, but panic took over her. Eduardo followed her, looking for answers. Meanwhile, Fernando also ran after her, trying to resolve the situation. Eduardo, please forgive me. I did this out of desperation. Beatriz screamed, tears streaming down her face. You lied to me. You and Fernando. Eduardo shouted back, unable to believe what was happening. Fernando, still trying to maintain control, grabbed Beatriz by the arm, but she violently pulled away. In the commotion, Beatriz lost her balance and slipped on the edge of the lake, falling heavily into the water. The impact was strong, and the sound of her head hitting echoed through the garden. Eduardo, in despair, jumped into the water to try to save her, but it was too late. The party, which had started with so much glamour, ended in tragedy. Beatriz was pulled from the water lifeless. Eduardo, devastated, stared at the body of the woman he thought he loved. And then, amidst the chaos, Laura finally confessed her last secret. I did all this because Fernando was going to run away with her. They tricked me too. He was always with me before Beatriz. They were planning to run away and leave me alone. The shattering truth fell like a final bombshell. Eduardo, betrayed by everyone, stood in silence, watching the wreckage of his life. Everything he had ever known was shattered in a single day. Did this story catch you by surprise? Be sure to like and comment below what you thought of this shocking twist. Share it with your friends who love dramas like this and subscribe to the channel for more intense stories like this.